5 years had passed since the downfall of Julian's empire, and the city had been rebuilt from the rubble of his tyranny. Kurt McSassafras, once a simple man, had become a cyborg thanks to advanced technology provided by the government. He had been appointed as the marshal of the city, tasked with maintaining law and order in the newly established democracy. One day, while Kurt was patrolling the city, he received an emergency call from the high-security prison. Anna, Julian's former right-hand woman, had managed to break him out of his cell, and they were now on the run. Kurt sprang into action, activating his cybernetic enhancements and racing towards the prison. As he arrived, he found that Anna and Julian had already escaped and were heading towards the city's outskirts. Kurt chased after them, using his advanced sensors and agility to keep up with their vehicle. However, he soon found himself outnumbered as several of Julian's loyal followers joined the pursuit. Despite being outnumbered, Kurt fought valiantly, taking down several of Julian's followers before finally cornering the escape vehicle in an abandoned warehouse on the city's outskirts. With Julian and Anna trapped, Kurt approached them, ready to take them into custody. But Anna had one last trick up her sleeve. She activated a hidden explosive device, causing the warehouse to collapse around them. As the dust settled, Kurt emerged from the wreckage, his cyborg enhancements damaged but still functioning. Julian and Anna were nowhere to be seen, and Kurt knew that they had escaped. Frustrated and angry, Kurt vowed to bring them to justice and protect the city from their threats. He knew that his cyborg abilities would be put to the test in the coming days, but he was ready to face any challenge that came his way. As he walked away from the wreckage, Kurt wondered what other challenges awaited him in his role as the marshal of the city. But one thing was for sure. He was more determined than ever to keep the citizens safe and prevent another tyrant from rising to power. Daniel was sitting in his living room, surrounded by baby clothes and toys, feeling overwhelmed and excited about becoming a father soon. He was staring at his phone, waiting for a call from Kurt, his old friend and ally, who had recently become the marshal of the city. Suddenly his phone rang and he quickly answered. "Kurt, what's going on?" he asked anxiously. "Danny, listen carefully," Kurt said in a serious tone. "Julian has escaped from prison and Anna helped him." Daniel's heart sank. He had been hoping that Julian would stay locked up for the rest of his life, but now he was back on the loose, and with Anna's help, he was even more dangerous. "What should I do?" Daniel asked, his mind racing with possibilities. "I need you to round up our old team," Kurt replied. "We're going to need all the help we can get to take Julian down once and for all." Daniel nodded, feeling a sense of determination wash over him. He knew that this was a fight he couldn't avoid, not when his city and his family were at stake. "I'll call them right away," he said, "and we'll meet at your office in an hour." "Good," Kurt said, "and Danny, be careful. You're going to be a father soon, and your family needs you." "I will," Daniel promised. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect them." With that, he hung up the phone and got to work, calling his old team members and organizing a plan to take down Julian and Anna once and for all. He knew that this was going to be the toughest battle of his life, but he was ready for it. As he gathered his things and headed out the door, he couldn't help but feel a sense of fear and excitement. He was about to become a father, but he was also about to face off against his greatest enemy. But with his team by his side and Kurt as the marshal of the city, he felt like anything was possible. He was ready to fight for his family and his city, and he wasn't going to back down now. In a high-security prison located in the heart of the city, Branto was serving his time for his crimes against humanity. He was alone in his cell, staring at the ceiling, thinking of ways to escape. Suddenly, the door opened, and to his surprise, he saw a familiar face, Arnold Schwarzenegger. "Branto, it's time to go," Arnold said as he unlocked Branto's cell. Branto couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Arnold, what are you doing here?" he asked. "We're getting you out of here," Arnold replied. Before Branto could ask any further questions, Arnold handed him a gun and a bag filled with money. "Put these on and follow me," Arnold said as he gestured towards the exit. Branto quickly put on the gear and followed Arnold out of the prison. As they were leaving, they were spotted by the prison guards, who immediately sounded the alarm. Kurt McSassafras, who was now the marshal of the city, heard the alarm and immediately rushed to the prison. As he arrived, he saw Arnold and Branto escaping in a car. Kurt quickly activated the hoverbike parked nearby and started chasing after them. Arnold and Branto tried their best to escape, but Kurt was too fast for them. He fired several rounds from his laser gun, but Arnold was able to dodge them. Branto knew that he couldn't outrun Kurt forever, so he came up with a plan. He threw a smoke grenade which blinded Kurt temporarily, and then he and Arnold drove away in another direction. Kurt recovered from the smoke and realized that he had lost them. He knew that they would be back, and he would be ready for them. As for Branto and Arnold, they were now free and had a lot of catching up to do. They drove to a secret location where Branto had hidden his latest creation, a robotic army. Arnold was impressed by the army and immediately realized the potential it had. He knew that they could use it to take over the city and establish their own rule. Branto was hesitant at first, but Arnold convinced him that it was the only way to ensure their survival. Together, they started working on their plan to overthrow the current government and establish their own empire. Little did they know that Kurt was already one step ahead of them, and he was prepared to take down anyone who threatened the peace of his city. Kurt McSassafras was in his office, contemplating the next steps in his mission to take down Julian and Branto's empire. He knew he needed a team of skilled individuals to help him, so he called upon his old friend Daniel for assistance. "Daniel, we need to discuss our next move," Kurt said as he picked up the phone to call him. "Sure, Kurt. What's going on?" Daniel asked, answering the call. "Julian and Branto have escaped from prison and we need to act fast. I think it's time we assemble a team to take them down once and for all," Kurt explained. "I'm with you, Kurt. Who do you have in mind for the team?" Daniel asked. "I have a few people in mind, actually. I was thinking of recruiting George Lucas, the legendary filmmaker NBA Beast, a former basketball player turned security expert, Jar Jar Binks, a skilled hacker and computer expert, and Yepes, a master strategist and tactician," Kurt explained. "Sounds like a solid team. When do we get started?" Daniel asked. "As soon as possible. I'll contact each of them and set up a meeting to discuss our plan of attack," Kurt said, ending the call. Over the next few days, Kurt met with each member of the team individually, discussing the mission and their roles in taking down Julian and Branto. George Lucas was tasked with developing a plan of attack, NBA Beast with providing security for the team, Jar Jar Binks with hacking into Julian and Branto's systems to gather information, and Yepes with strategizing the team's movements and tactics. As they prepared for the mission, Daniel received some news of his own. His wife was pregnant, and he would soon be a father. He knew that this mission would be dangerous, but he was determined to see it through. The team worked tirelessly, gathering intel and planning their approach. Finally, the day of the mission arrived. They approached Julian and Branto's compound, ready to take them down. But as they made their move, they were met with unexpected resistance. Julian and Branto had assembled their own team of skilled soldiers, and a fierce battle ensued. Despite their best efforts, the team was outnumbered and outgunned. Jar Jar Binks was the first to fall, followed by NBA Beast. Yepes was injured, and George Lucas was forced to retreat. Daniel, watching from a distance, was devastated. He had lost his friend and mentor, and the mission had failed. But he knew that he couldn't give up. He would continue the fight. Kurt McSassafras had always been a master at creating robots that were both functional and formidable. He had created an army of cyborg soldiers that had helped him gain control over the city and maintain law and order. But now, he faced a new challenge: the threat of Arnold Schwarzenegger, who had broken Branto out of prison. Kurt knew that he needed something special to take on the Terminator himself, and that's when he got an idea. He decided to create a robot of Bruce Campbell, one of his favorite action heroes. Kurt had long been a fan of Campbell's movies, and he knew that he had the perfect combination of charisma and toughness that he needed to take on Schwarzenegger. Kurt spent months designing and building the robot, using the latest in cyborg technology to create a machine that was the perfect blend of human and machine. He designed it to be agile and fast, with incredible strength and lightning-fast reflexes. He even programmed it with a snarky sense of humor, just like the real Bruce Campbell. When the robot was finally complete, Kurt put it to the test against some of his most advanced cyborg soldiers. It easily defeated them, proving that it was more than a match for any of Schwarzenegger's forces. Kurt then brought the robot to Daniel, who was skeptical at first, but soon came to see the genius of Kurt's creation. Together, they formulated a plan to take down Schwarzenegger and Branto once and for all. The day of the showdown arrived, and Kurt and his team went to battle against Schwarzenegger and Branto. The robot of Bruce Campbell led the charge, taking on Schwarzenegger himself in a brutal fight that shook the city to its core. In the end, the robot emerged victorious, taking down Schwarzenegger and bringing an end to his reign of terror. With Branto back in custody and Schwarzenegger defeated, Kurt and his team had saved the day once again. From that day forward, the robot of Bruce Campbell became a legend in the city, a symbol of hope and strength against any who dared to challenge the rule of Kurt McSassafras. And for Kurt himself, it was just another victory in a long line of triumphs, a testament to his skill as a creator and a leader. Julian sat in the laboratory, surrounded by the latest technology, his mind consumed with a singular focus: to upgrade his body to an entirely machine-based one. He had already made significant progress in integrating machine parts into his body, but he knew there was still a long way to go before he could become the ultimate machine-human hybrid. His team of scientists and engineers worked tirelessly on designing and building the necessary components. They had already implanted several cybernetic enhancements, including a bionic arm, an ocular implant, and a neural interface that allowed him to control machines with his thoughts. But Julian wanted more. He wanted to be able to run faster, jump higher, and see farther than any human ever could. He wanted to be virtually indestructible, impervious to disease and aging. He wanted to become a true machine, with all the benefits and none of the weaknesses of flesh and bone. His team worked for months on end, pushing the boundaries of science and technology to make Julian's dream a reality. They designed and built new components, experimented with different materials, and tested them all on robotic prototypes. Finally, after months of hard work and dedication, they were ready to implant the final components into Julian's body. They carefully opened his chest and removed his heart, replacing it with a cybernetic pump that would never fail. They replaced his lungs with mechanical versions that could filter out any harmful particles in the air, making him impervious to pollutants and toxins. They replaced his digestive system with a synthetic one that could extract all the necessary nutrients from any kind of food. Finally, they attached a metal exoskeleton around his body, covering every inch of his skin with a layer of metallic armor. Julian could feel the power coursing through his veins as he stood up, towering over his team of scientists and engineers. He flexed his new metal fingers and felt the power coursing through his new mechanical body. He looked into the mirror and saw the glowing red eyes of his ocular implant staring back at him. Julian smiled, knowing that he had achieved his dream of becoming the ultimate machine-human hybrid. He was no longer a man. He was something more, something beyond human. He was a machine, and nothing could stop him now. Julian stood on top of a tall building, surveying the chaos that his invasion had wrought upon the city. Smoke billowed from buildings, fires burned out of control, and the sound of gunfire echoed through the streets. He watched with a sense of satisfaction as his troops moved through the city, rounding up citizens and taking control of key locations. But there was one person missing from the scene: Kurt McSassafras, the marshal of the city. Julian had captured Kurt earlier that day and was holding him hostage, hoping to use him as leverage against the rest of the city. As he stood there watching the chaos unfold, he could feel Kurt's eyes on him, silently daring him to make a move. "Ah, Kurt," Julian said, turning to face the bound and gagged marshal. "I must say, it's been a pleasure having you here as my guest. It's a shame you couldn't be here to witness the fall of your beloved city." Kurt glared at Julian with an intensity that made even the hardened dictator pause for a moment. He had underestimated the marshal's determination and resilience, and now he was paying the price for it. "You may have won this battle, Julian," Kurt said, his voice muffled by the gag. "But the war is far from over. My people will rise up against you, and they will drive you and your troops out of this city." Julian chuckled, amused by Kurt's bravado. "Is that so, Marshal? You seem awfully confident for someone who's about to watch his city burn to the ground." But Kurt didn't flinch. "My city will survive, Julian. It has survived worse than this, and it will survive your tyranny. You may have taken my freedom, but you will never break my spirit." Julian's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold fury. "We shall see, Marshal. We shall see." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Kurt alone to watch as the city burned. But even in the face of such overwhelming destruction, Kurt refused to give up hope. He knew that one day the people of the city would rise up against their oppressors and reclaim their freedom. And when that day came, he would be there, leading the charge. Kurt McSassafras was in dire need of help. He knew that he couldn't take on Julian's new robot body alone. He reached out to his old friend Daniel. Together, they needed to assemble a team to stop Julian and save the city from his wrath. Daniel immediately agreed to help, and they started to brainstorm who else could help them. Kurt suggested Yepes, a computer hacker who could potentially infiltrate Julian's robot body and shut it down from the inside. They also recruited George Lucas, who was a genius when it came to technology, and Jar Jar Binks, who was a skilled fighter. The team headed to Julian's secret headquarters, which was heavily guarded by his minions. They managed to sneak in undetected and were face to face with Julian and his new robot body. Kurt was being held hostage by Julian, and they knew they needed to act fast. Yepes tried to hack into Julian's body, but something went wrong, and his computer exploded on his face, killing him instantly. Julian then turned his attention to George Lucas, grabbing him by the neck and snapping it before they could even react. Daniel and Kurt knew they needed to get out of there before it was too late. They grabbed Jar Jar Binks and started to retreat. Julian's minions were hot on their heels, but Jar Jar was able to hold them off with his fighting skills. They managed to escape the headquarters and regroup to come up with a new plan. Daniel and Kurt were devastated by the loss of their friends, but they knew they needed to keep fighting. They would stop at nothing to take down Julian and his evil empire. Julian sat in his private jet, watching the world fly by beneath him. He was on his way to Washington, D.C., where he planned to stage his most daring move yet: the overthrow of President Elmo. For years, Julian had been building his power, amassing an army of loyal followers and accumulating resources that he could use to his advantage. And now, he was ready to make his move. As he landed in D.C., Julian could see the chaos that had already begun to unfold. His agents had already infiltrated the city, causing riots and confusion in the streets. He smiled to himself, pleased with the effectiveness of his plan. Julian made his way to the White House, where he knew he would find President Elmo. He burst into the Oval Office, flanked by his most trusted lieutenants. "Hello, Elmo," Julian said, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "I've come to relieve you of your duties." Elmo stood up, a look of shock and defiance on his face. "You'll never get away with this, Julian," he spat. Julian simply laughed. "I already have. The people are with me, Elmo. They're tired of your weak leadership. It's time for a change." Elmo lunged at Julian, but he was quickly overpowered by Julian's guards. Julian stepped forward, looking down at Elmo with a mix of triumph and contempt. "Your time is over, Elmo," he said. "It's my turn now." With that, Julian sat down at the resolute desk and signed a series of executive orders that effectively made him the new leader of the United States. He then addressed the nation via a live broadcast, announcing his takeover and promising to lead the country to a new era of prosperity and strength. As the world watched in shock and horror, Julian's message was clear. He was in charge now, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Julian's empire had been growing stronger and more dangerous by the day. He had already taken over most of the city and was now turning his sights towards the White House. With Branto by his side, Julian had managed to break into the maximum security prison where Branto had been held, using his knowledge of the prison's systems to bypass the guards and free him. After being freed, Branto began working on a special project for Julian, a powerful reactor that would provide him with almost unlimited energy. Branto worked tirelessly, day and night, to construct the reactor, with Julian overseeing the entire process. Meanwhile, Kurt and Daniel had been forced into hiding with Megan, who was now heavily pregnant. They knew that they needed to stop Julian's plans before it was too late, but they were running out of time. As Branto worked on the reactor, Kurt and Daniel began to formulate a plan. They knew that they couldn't take on Julian and his army alone, so they decided to reach out to some old friends for help. Together, they assembled a team of experts, including a skilled hacker, a former CIA agent, and a group of elite soldiers. They knew that this would be a dangerous mission, but they were determined to stop Julian and his evil plans. As the team prepared to launch their attack, they received news that the reactor had been completed. Julian had finally achieved his ultimate goal, and the energy from the reactor was powering his entire empire. The team knew that they had to act quickly. They set out towards Julian's headquarters, determined to put an end to his reign of terror once and for all. As they approached the building, they were met with heavy resistance from Julian's army. But they fought on, determined to reach the reactor and shut it down. With Kurt and Daniel leading the charge, they finally made it to the reactor room, but they were too late. The reactor was already powering up, and there was no way to shut it down. Suddenly, there was a massive explosion, and the entire building shook. Kurt, Daniel, and the rest of the team managed to escape, but they knew that they had failed in their mission. Julian's empire was too powerful, and they were unable to stop him. As they watched from afar, they saw Julian emerge from the rubble, his body now completely transformed into a machine. With a menacing laugh, Julian declared himself the ruler of the world, sending a chilling message to the entire planet. The team knew that they had to regroup and come up with a new plan. They would have to find a way to stop Julian before it was too late, or else the entire world would be doomed to a dark and terrifying future. Julian and Anna had successfully taken over the city, but their ambitions didn't stop there. They had set their sights on space and had begun building a spaceship with the help of Branto's technical expertise. As the spaceship neared completion, Julian was eager to test its capabilities. He and Anna had a plan to launch the reactor into space, where it would absorb the energy from the stars and become even more powerful. But they needed to make sure the ship was ready for the journey. Julian called in his most trusted engineers, including Branto and a few other skilled technicians. They worked tirelessly to finish the ship and prepare it for launch. Meanwhile, Kurt and Daniel had been keeping a close eye on the progress and were growing increasingly concerned about what Julian had planned. One night, as Julian was conducting a test flight of the ship, Kurt and Daniel snuck aboard. They searched the ship, looking for any clues as to Julian's plans, but found nothing concrete. That was until they stumbled upon a secret room, hidden deep within the ship. Inside the room, they found schematics and plans for a massive energy weapon, capable of destroying entire planets. They realized that Julian and Anna were planning to use the reactor to power this weapon and become the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Kurt and Daniel knew they had to act fast to stop them. They confronted Julian and Anna, but the couple was ready for them. They had installed a series of traps and defenses throughout the ship, and Kurt and Daniel found themselves locked in a dangerous game of cat and mouse. Despite their best efforts, Kurt and Daniel were unable to stop Julian and Anna from launching the reactor into space. As the ship blasted off into the galaxy, Kurt and Daniel could only watch in horror as Julian and Anna's plans for domination unfolded before their eyes. But the story wasn't over yet. Kurt and Daniel knew they couldn't give up the fight against Julian and Anna. They would continue to fight against them, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. The fate of the galaxy depended on it. Kurt McSassafras and Daniel had been tracking Julian's ship for weeks, and finally, they caught up with it. But their victory was short-lived when they realized that Megan, Daniel's wife, was in labor and needed medical attention immediately. As they frantically searched for a safe place to land, Julian's ship suddenly powered up its engines and took off, heading straight for space. Kurt and Daniel knew they couldn't let him get away and decided to pursue him, despite the risks. As they neared the ship, Julian activated his reactor, which had been upgraded with Branto's help. The ship's engines roared to life, and Kurt and Daniel knew they had to act fast. They boarded the ship and engaged in a brutal fight with Julian and Anna, who were determined to keep the reactor safe. But as the fight raged on, Megan's labor intensified, and it became clear that they needed to get her to safety. Kurt knew what he had to do. With a heavy heart, he grabbed Julian and threw himself into the reactor, knowing that it was the only way to stop Julian and save the others. The reactor exploded, and the ship shook violently as Julian's body was consumed by the flames. Kurt's sacrifice had saved the others, but they were left to mourn the loss of their friend and hero. Julian was believed to be dead, but rumors began to circulate that he had survived and was plotting his revenge. Daniel and the others remained vigilant, knowing that they would always be in danger as long as Julian was alive. As for Megan, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl, who she and Daniel named Kurt in honor of their fallen friend. They vowed to raise her to be as brave and selfless as her namesake, and to never forget the sacrifice he made for them all. In the aftermath of the reactor explosion, the shockwave rippled through the galaxy, attracting the attention of a powerful overlord known as Zorag. He was considered the most feared and ruthless being in the galaxy, and his mere presence was enough to send shivers down the spine of even the bravest warriors. As Zorag approached the destroyed reactor, he scanned the area, trying to determine the source of the explosion. When he detected the remnants of the reactor, he landed his massive spaceship on the scorched Earth and stepped out, his intimidating form looming over everything around him. Zorag was a massive, towering creature, with scales covering his skin and eyes that glowed with a fierce intensity. He was armed with a variety of weapons, from energy swords to blasters, and was known for his brutal tactics in battle. As he surveyed the wreckage, he detected a faint life signature amidst the rubble. Without hesitation, he began to dig through the debris until he uncovered Julian, barely clinging to life. Zorag recognized Julian from his reputation as the former ruler of a powerful empire, and he saw an opportunity to gain an advantage in his own quest for domination. He used his advanced technology to keep Julian alive and began to question him about his plans and resources. Despite his weakened state, Julian refused to disclose any information to Zorag, knowing that his cooperation would only lead to his own downfall. Zorag, impressed by Julian's bravery, decided to spare his life for the moment, hoping that he would eventually reveal his secrets. Julian was left to recover from his injuries, knowing that he had narrowly escaped death once again. As he lay in his bed, he pondered his next move. He knew that he was no match for Zorag in a straight fight, but he was determined to regain his power and reclaim his throne. With a renewed sense of determination, Julian began to hatch a new plan, one that would require him to gather allies and resources from all corners of the galaxy. He knew that the road ahead would be long and treacherous, but he was willing to do whatever it took to regain his power and bring his empire back to its former glory. Julian was locked up in a dark, damp cell, deep in the underground prison of Zorag's fortress. His limbs were shackled to the walls, preventing him from moving more than a few inches in any direction. The pain from the chains digging into his wrists and ankles was intense, but it was nothing compared to the torture he had endured at the hands of his captors. Zorag, the powerful overlord who had taken control of the region after Julian's defeat, had spared Julian's life for his own amusement. He wanted to know everything about Julian's empire, his allies, and his enemies. But most of all, he wanted to know about Daniel, the man who had defeated Julian twice and brought an end to his rule. Julian refused to give Zorag any information, but he knew that it was only a matter of time before Zorag resorted to more extreme measures. As he lay in his cell, Julian's thoughts turned to Kurt McSassafras, the brave marshal who had sacrificed himself to destroy Julian's reactor. Julian had always underestimated Kurt, but he had to admit that the marshal had proven himself to be a worthy opponent. To Julian's surprise, he heard a familiar voice coming from the cell next to his. "Julian, is that you?" It was Kurt, still alive but badly wounded. Julian struggled to move closer to the wall so he could hear Kurt better. "Kurt, what are you doing here?" "They captured me after the reactor exploded," Kurt explained. "They've been torturing me for information about you and Daniel." Julian felt a pang of guilt. He had always seen Kurt as an obstacle to his plans, but he realized now that Kurt was a valuable ally. "I'm sorry, Kurt. I never realized how much you meant to me until now." Kurt laughed weakly. "Don't get all sentimental on me, Julian. We've got to figure out a way to escape." Julian nodded, his mind racing. He knew that he couldn't escape alone, but with Kurt's help, they might have a chance. "I have a plan," he said quietly, hoping that the guards weren't listening. He explained his plan to Kurt, who nodded in agreement. "It's risky, but it might work," Kurt said. Julian waited for the guards to come and take him away for another round of torture. When they arrived, he put his plan into action. He attacked the guards with all his strength, using his robotic limbs to overpower them. Kurt joined in, fighting with renewed energy despite his injuries. They managed to overpower the guards and escape their cells. The two former enemies worked together to fight their way through the fortress, taking down anyone who stood in their way. Finally, they reached the exit, where they found Zorag waiting for them. Julian and Kurt stood up, ready for a fight, but Zorag simply laughed. "Oh, don't worry. I'm not going to fight you. I just want to know more about this man who defeated Julian twice." Julian clenched his fists. "I won't tell you anything." Zorag shrugged. "That's okay. I have other ways of getting the information I need." He turned and left the cell, locking the door behind him. Julian and Kurt knew they had to act fast. They worked together to pick the lock on the door, and as they made their escape, they heard Zorag's angry shouts echoing through the corridors. They ran through the halls, dodging guards and navigating through unfamiliar territory. But as they neared the exit, they saw Zorag waiting for them, flanked by his army. "We're no match for him," Julian whispered. "We have to get out of here and warn Earth about his arrival." Kurt nodded. "Agreed. Let's go." They turned and ran in the opposite direction, searching for another way out. But Zorag's army was hot on their heels. They could hear the sound of blasters firing, the screams of the guards they had left in their wake. Julian and Kurt burst into a control room, hoping to find a way to escape. But Zorag was already there, waiting for them. He held a device in his hand, one that Julian recognized as a teleportation device. "You two aren't going anywhere," Zorag sneered. "I have plans for you." Before Julian and Kurt could react, Zorag activated the device, and a bright flash of light enveloped them. When it faded, they found themselves in a strange, unfamiliar place. As they looked around, they realized that they had been transported to the heart of Zorag's empire. They were surrounded by towering buildings and advanced technology, and they knew that they were in for a fight if they were going to make it out alive. But for now, they had a more immediate concern. They needed to find a way to warn Earth about Zorag's arrival, and they needed to do it fast. Julian and Kurt exchanged a glance, and then they set off into the unknown, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Julian and Kurt were fighting for their lives against Zorag's army on the alien planet. They had been captured and tortured by Zorag, but managed to escape and steal a small spacecraft to return to Earth and warn their people about the impending threat. The two unlikely allies fought side by side, using their unique skills to take down the alien soldiers. Julian's advanced robotic body gave him strength and durability beyond that of a normal human, while Kurt's quick reflexes and expert marksmanship made him a formidable opponent. As they made their way through the enemy lines, they stumbled upon a cache of advanced weaponry. Julian immediately recognized the technology, having stolen it from the human military during his previous reign of terror. With these new weapons, they were able to take out the enemy with even greater efficiency. But their victory was short-lived, as Zorag himself appeared on the battlefield, towering over them with his massive size and strength. Julian and Kurt knew they were no match for him and quickly made a run for it. They managed to reach their spacecraft and blasted off into space, leaving the planet behind them. Julian took control of the ship's systems, calculating their course back to Earth. As they hurtled through the void of space, Julian and Kurt had a chance to catch their breath and plan their next move. They both knew that Zorag would not stop until he had conquered Earth and enslaved its people. "We have to warn them," Kurt said, his voice urgent. "We have to let them know what's coming." Julian nodded in agreement. "But who will listen to me?" he said, a hint of bitterness in his voice. "I'm a former tyrant, a criminal. Why would they trust me?" Kurt placed a reassuring hand on Julian's metallic shoulder. "Because you're the only one who knows what we're up against. And if we fail, there won't be anyone left to judge you." The two continued to discuss their strategy as the ship hurtled through the stars, determined to do whatever it takes to save their planet from destruction. Julian and Kurt arrived at Daniel's doorstep, surprising him with their unexpected presence. After the initial shock, Daniel welcomed them in and listened to their story about Zorag's invasion and Kurt's survival. Daniel knew that they needed to act quickly and assemble a team to stop Zorag's army before they reached Earth. He suggested bringing in Anna, the skilled fighter who had previously worked with Julian and Kurt. They also needed Gordon Ramsay, the culinary genius who could cook up a plan in no time. Danny DeVito, the quirky actor, could provide some comic relief and unconventional tactics. Julian's twin brother, Jappa, who had been separated from him at birth, could be a valuable asset with his unique set of skills. Elon Musk, the billionaire entrepreneur, could provide his expertise in technology and innovation to help them come up with a strategy to defeat Zorag. And Yepes, who had upgraded himself into a new robot body, could be the key to infiltrating Zorag's base. Kermit the Frog also joined the team with a new body that he had built himself. He had been following the news of Zorag's invasion and wanted to help in any way he could. The team gathered around the table discussing their plan of action. Gordon Ramsay whipped up some snacks and everyone dug in as they strategized. They knew that Zorag was powerful, but they also knew that they were stronger together. Daniel led the team in a rousing speech, reminding everyone of their strengths and what they were fighting for. They were fighting for their families, their homes, and their planet. They were fighting for their future. Together, they devised a plan to infiltrate Zorag's base, destroy his army, and take down the Overlord himself. With each member contributing their unique skills, they knew they had a fighting chance. As they wrapped up their meeting, everyone went their separate ways, ready to do their part in the battle to come. Julian and Kurt shared a nod of mutual respect, acknowledging that they may not have been friends in the past, but they were united in their goal to save the planet. The team was ready to face the biggest challenge of their lives, and they were determined to emerge victorious. Daniel and his team were on their way to face Zorag, the powerful overlord who threatened to destroy their planet. They had assembled a team of skilled fighters and strategists, including Julian and Kurt, two former enemies who had put their differences aside to fight a greater threat. But just as they were about to launch their attack, Daniel received a distressing message from Zorag. He had captured Daniel's family and demanded that he surrender himself in exchange for their safety. Daniel was torn. He knew he couldn't risk his family's lives, but he also couldn't abandon his team and let Zorag win. He shared the news with the rest of the group, and they all agreed that they couldn't give up without a fight. As they prepared for battle, Gordon Ramsay stepped forward with his lamb sauce cannon, a weapon he had developed specifically for this mission. He bravely charged into battle, taking down countless Zorag soldiers with his signature sauce blasts. But in the end, he was overwhelmed by the enemy's numbers and fell in battle. The team was devastated by Gordon's loss, but they knew they had to keep fighting. Kermit the Frog, who had been upgraded to a new body with advanced combat capabilities, stepped up to lead the charge. Elon Musk, who had also been outfitted with a powerful new robot body, provided crucial support with his technological expertise. But as they fought their way through Zorag's army, Julian and Kurt realized something was wrong. Anna, Julian's longtime ally and former lover, had been acting strange since they arrived on Zorag's planet. Suddenly, she turned on them, revealing that she had been working with Zorag all along. The team was caught off guard, and Julian and Kurt found themselves betrayed and vulnerable. Zorag took advantage of the situation, capturing them and using their knowledge to gain the upper hand in the battle. But Daniel and his remaining team members refused to give up. They knew they had to fight on, even if the odds were against them. They rallied together, determined to save Julian and Kurt and stop Zorag's evil plans. As they discussed their next move, they knew that they had to come up with a new strategy. They couldn't let Gordon's sacrifice be in vain, and they couldn't let Zorag win. They needed to find a way to save Daniel's family, rescue Julian and Kurt, and defeat Zorag once and for all. Daniel had always been a warrior, but he had never faced a foe as formidable as Zorag. The two clashed on the battlefield, swords ringing out in the air as they fought for control. For a while, it seemed like Daniel might actually win. He was faster, stronger, and more skilled than the alien general. But then, something changed. Zorag began to fight more viciously, striking with a new ferocity that took Daniel off guard. He felt the blade slice into his shoulder, felt blood begin to pool around him on the ground, and then it was over. Zorag stood over him, grinning with his sharp teeth as he pressed his foot into Daniel's chest, pinning him to the ground. "I win," Zorag said, and the words felt like a death sentence. Daniel was taken prisoner, and for weeks he was subjected to the cruelest tortures that Zorag could devise, but the worst was yet to come. The day when he was forced to watch as Zorag tortured his wife. He screamed and raged as he watched her suffer, her body writhing in agony as the alien general laughed. Daniel's heart broke as she took her last breath, her eyes closing forever. He was left alone in his cell, broken and defeated, with nothing left to fight for. But even in his darkest moments, he swore to himself that he would find a way to avenge her death, to take down Zorag and all that he stood for. The moment Julian and Kurt broke free from their restraints, they knew they had to act fast. They were in the heart of Zorag's stronghold, and the powerful overlord wouldn't take kindly to their escape. Julian, driven by a burning desire for revenge, immediately set his sights on finding Anna, the one who had betrayed him. Kurt, on the other hand, knew that their top priority was to find Daniel and his daughter, who had been taken captive by Zorag's forces. He had to move quickly, hoping that he could get to them before it was too late. Julian quickly made his way through the corridors of the stronghold, his heart pounding with every step. He was determined to find Anna, no matter the cost. When he finally located her, she was cowering in a corner, clearly terrified by his arrival. "You betrayed me, Anna," Julian spat out, his voice full of venom. "You chose the wrong side, and now you will pay the price for your treachery." Anna tried to plead for mercy, but Julian wasn't interested in hearing it. With a cold fury, he ended her life, feeling a sense of satisfaction as he watched the life leave her eyes. Meanwhile, Kurt had found where they were keeping Daniel and his daughter. They were being held in a large chamber, surrounded by guards who seemed to be heavily armed. Kurt knew that he had to act fast, but he also knew that he was outnumbered and outgunned. Thinking quickly, he grabbed a nearby laser gun and started firing, taking out the guards one by one. But just as he was about to rescue Daniel and his daughter, Zorag appeared, towering over him like a giant. Zorag sneered at Kurt, mocking him for thinking he could defeat him. "You are nothing compared to me!" Zorag bellowed, his voice echoing through the chamber. Kurt knew that Zorag was right. He was no match for the powerful overlord, but he wasn't going to give up without a fight. As Zorag prepared to laser beam Daniel's daughter, Kurt made the ultimate sacrifice, hurling himself in front of the beam to save her life. Julian and Daniel arrived just in time to witness the heroic act, and they knew that they had to finish what Kurt had started. They knew that they had to take down Zorag, no matter the cost. The three of them battled furiously, their weapons flashing as they exchanged blows with the Overlord. Zorag seemed unbeatable, but just as all hope seemed lost, Elon Musk arrived, having hacked the ship's systems to gain control. Musk used his technological expertise to hack into Zorag's suit, immobilizing him long enough for Julian to hold him down while the ship self-destructed. As the ship exploded in a blinding flash of light, Julian, Daniel, and Musk were thrown into space. They floated there for a moment, taking in the aftermath of the battle, mourning the loss of their friend and ally, Kurt. But even in the face of tragedy, they knew that they had done what needed to be done. They had defeated Zorag, and they had avenged the deaths of so many who had fallen in the war. They were the heroes that their people needed, and they knew that they would continue to fight for the greater good, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Daniel stood solemnly with his daughter by his side as they watched the caskets of Kurt McSassafras and his wife Megan being lowered into the ground. It was a somber day, and everyone present was paying their last respects to the brave souls who had given their lives for the greater good. Suddenly, the sound of a massive explosion shattered the mournful silence. Everyone turned to see a spacecraft descending from the sky. It landed with a resounding thud, crushing the hapless Kermit the Frog under its weight. Daniel's daughter cried out in terror, clutching her father's hand tightly. As the dust settled, a figure emerged from the ship. It was Zorag, the ruthless overlord who had caused so much destruction and pain. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he watched in disbelief. How was this possible? They had destroyed Zorag's ship and thought him dead. Julian was watching the events unfold from a safe distance. He couldn't believe his eyes as he saw Zorag standing there, alive and well. He knew that this was bad news. Zorag was even more powerful than he had been before, and Julian had a feeling that he was out for revenge. As Zorag approached the grieving crowd, his eyes fell upon Daniel and his daughter. He sneered, remembering the way they had defeated him in the past. Without a word, he raised his arm, and a beam of deadly energy shot forth towards Daniel's daughter. Daniel acted on instinct and leaped in front of the blast, shielding his daughter from harm. He fell to the ground, writhing in pain as the energy coursed through his body. Zorag approached him slowly, a sinister grin spreading across his face. But just as Zorag was about to finish Daniel off, a voice rang out from behind him. "Not so fast, Zorag!" It was Julian. He had snuck up behind the Overlord and now had him in a chokehold. Zorag struggled, trying to break free, but Julian's grip was too strong. Daniel watched in amazement as Julian fought against Zorag. He knew that Julian was his enemy, but in that moment, he couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude towards the man. Julian was fighting to protect them, just as they had done for him in the past. Suddenly, there was a loud beep, and Julian released Zorag. "It's done," he said, nodding towards the ship. "Elon Musk has hacked the ship's system. It's going to self-destruct in 10 seconds. Zorag let out a guttural roar and lunged at Julian, but it was too late. The ship exploded in a massive ball of fire, engulfing Zorag in the flames. As the smoke cleared, Julian approached Daniel and his daughter. "I know we've had our differences," he said, "but I want to thank you for everything you've done. Kurt was a great man, and he will be missed." Daniel nodded, feeling a sense of respect towards the man he had once called his enemy. "We couldn't have done it without you," he replied. Julian turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Daniel looked down at his daughter and realized that she was still trembling with fear. He took her hand and led her away from the chaos, grateful that they had both survived. For years, the city had been rebuilding after the devastation caused by the war with Zorag. Among the people who were celebrated as heroes for their efforts to stop Zorag was the late Kurt Sassafras, who sacrificed his life to save Daniel and his daughter. As the city continued to recover, Daniel decided to honor Kurt's memory by building a statue in his honor. The statue was placed in the center of the city, and it depicted Kurt holding a shield and a sword, ready to defend the city from any threat. At the same time, Branto was watching everything from the shadows. He had been the mastermind behind Zorag's project, and he had been manipulating events to ensure its success. Branto sat alone in his dimly lit lab, his eyes fixated on the holographic screen in front of him. His fingers danced over the control panel, accessing various files and data.
Project Zorag was a success,
he muttered to himself.
but it's only the beginning.
He leaned back in his chair, the screen flickering to life as it displayed footage of Kurt Sassafras's funeral.
Kurt Sassafras, such a shame he had to go, but his death was necessary. His loyalty to Daniel made him a liability.
Branto paused, his eyes narrowing as he continued to watch the holographic image of Kurt's funeral.
Julian is nothing but a puppet. He was easy to manipulate, to control. And now that he's out of the way, Daniel is the last obstacle to my plans.
He tapped a few buttons on the control panel, the screen now displaying images of Daniel and his forces.
But they are weak, so weak. They'll crumble under the might of my creations. The downfall of Daniel and his pathetic little army is inevitable.
Branto's lips twisted into a sinister smile as he gazed upon the images before him.
Everything is going according to plan.
Julian had always been a ruthless and determined individual, willing to do whatever it takes to achieve his goals. But as he watched over Daniel's family from the shadows, a sense of guilt began to weigh on him. He had been responsible for so much destruction and pain, and he couldn't help but feel responsible for the turmoil that Daniel and his family were going through. He remembered the times when he and Daniel were once friends, fighting together to protect their city from threats. But as their paths diverged, they became enemies, each driven by their own ambitions and beliefs. Julian wondered if things could have been different if he had made different choices. He had always believed that the end justified the means, but now he saw the cost of his actions, the destruction, the loss of life, and the pain that he had caused. As he watched over Daniel's family, Julian knew that he had to make things right. He couldn't undo the past, but he could try to make a better future. He began to think about ways that he could help Daniel and his family, to make up for the harm that he had caused. But he also knew that he couldn't simply make amends and expect forgiveness. He had to earn it, and that would take time and effort. Julian was willing to do whatever it takes to make things right, but he knew that it wouldn't be easy. For now, he continued to watch over Daniel's family from the shadows, hoping that they would find some measure of peace in their grief. And as he did, He made a solemn vow to himself that he would do whatever it takes to make up for the harm he had caused and to protect those who needed it most.